Okay, item number 9. And I look to Associate Director Bain first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. While staff reorganizes themselves to come up and provide support, if I could just briefly comment about the format of the accommodation review report in front of you. Trustees had initially seen the King George Accommodation Review report, and in that report there was one recommended action. That's a result of the ARC and board staff agreeing on the accommodation recommendations for that review area. Tonight you will see that we have laid out in the report the recommendations from the Dalewood Accommodation Review Committee, as well as the staff recommendation. And indeed, throughout the background, we have tried to summarize as best we can in a few pages, because you've all received volumes of information about this, the essence of each of the sets of recommendations. I'm joined by a number of staff who are certainly pleased and ready to respond to trustee questions to facilitate your decision-making this evening. And I think I'll conclude there and then turn it back to you to move through the process.
Thank you, Associate Director. I've seen Trustee Bishop's hand already.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put a recommendation on the floor.
Okay, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm moving that Prince Philip close in June 2013, and that those students and the existing programming are relocated to George R. Allen effective September 2013, that the board approve the staff recommended upgrades as summarised in Table 2, which are, Mr. Chairman, an elevator, larger staff workroom and a workroom, bookroom and accessible washrooms at Dalewood, and for George R. Allen, an elevator, 4 additional kindergarten spaces, 3 additional classrooms, a second general purpose room, which is the new word for gymnasium, Mr. Chairman, larger staff and workroom, a bookroom, accessible washrooms, and second floor washrooms all at George R. Allen.
Thank you. I need a seconder for that recommended action. Thank you, Trustee Hicks. Recommended action B is on the floor for discussion. Trustee Bishop, as the mover, you can move first.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by thanking the committee for their hard work, many of whom are here, Mr. Chairman. They looked altogether at 13 options and examined many different scenarios. One of them was looking at one school, which would have resulted in 2020 of 815 students. And they also looked at various options for K-8 schools, hoping that in this way there could be a school kept on the Prince Philip side of Main Street and on the other side of Main Street where currently Dalewood and George R. Allen exist. But unfortunately, because of the problem of the small size of Prince Philip, a K-8 school there in 2020 would only be 313 students, or if French immersion was not part of the programming offered, would only be 249 students, which would lead to split grades and real problems with the programming, and be less than what the students are currently being provided, Mr. Chairman. And certainly less options than the students who would be at the other K-8 school in the area would provide. So from my point of view, and from many on the committee, those options did not go forward. So we ended up with 2 recommendations, and as always, closing schools is always a very emotional and very difficult decision. And the decision before us, I believe, is about whether to provide 3 community schools or provide decent accommodation for 2 schools. I think, as a parent wrote to me, he said, I think we need to reframe the debate about this issue. This needs to be about how to give our kids the best possible places to learn. And that, I believe, is what we're talking about tonight, Mr. Chairman. The board is short of capital funding and has been for more than 20 years. In 2010, 38% of our buildings were in need of renewal, at a cost of $356 million. Our buildings are old, and in 10 years' time, that will go up to 62% of our schools will be in need of renewal at a cost of $614 million. The 10 million we get each year, that's what we have this year, is very little. And the opportunities to provide any funding is limited. And I believe at this point, we have an opportunity, Mr. Chairman, to look at providing some upgrades to some schools in this particular neighbourhood. The 3 schools involved are in need of renewal. A parent said to me when their relatives came from New York, they commented that Dalewood looks like a school in the Bronx. Another parent has talked to me about her daughter always coming home for lunch as she won't use the washrooms in the school. Prince Philip has a porta pack which will need repair if the school is kept open, and maybe this will result in a portable being placed there. Hardly a wonderful facilities for our students. And I've been hauled over the coals twice by the school council at George R. Allen about the needs for washrooms, the need to repair the washrooms, need to have washrooms on other floors, and the needs to make the school accessible. And that has been, that's not just that's within the last 7 years, Mr. Chairman. At Dalewood, there have been boarded up windows in the gym for at least 10 years, which is hardly healthy in a place where kids are supposed to be active, and you know, hardly a good. So we have a need for renewal in schools, and now we have an opportunity. We have some one-time funding, which we're receiving from the province for kindergartens. This funding will not be there in the future, Mr. Chairman. We have an opportunity to build 4 purpose-built kindergartens at George R. Allen School. We have savings from operating only 2 schools rather than operating 3 schools. We have an opportunity to provide a proper-sized gym for the first time to George R. Allen community, and which currently at this time has very little community use. Well, that's what the data shows anyway. And we have an opportunity to make the school accessible and provide an elevator and provide better working conditions for our staff. And with an opportunity to make the school accessible, we will remove those children who live in the neighbourhood from having to attend another school and having to go to elsewhere. And we'll also have the opportunity to have students being, what we have at the moment is a special ed student has to be changed in the boys' washroom with an accessible washroom. That sort of condition won't exist any longer either. So if we go with this proposal that I put on the floor, Mr. Chairman, in George R. Allen in 2020 is projected to have 539 students, which is only 13 more than it had in 2006, when there were many students attending the school because it was the only French immersion school in the west end of Hamilton, providing French immersion to Ancaster and Dundas. But this time, Mr. Chairman, there will be, if we go with this proposal, there'll be another gym, there'll be additional classrooms, there'll be an elevator, there'll be change rooms, and we'll also be able to do some upgrades to Dalewood School as well. So on behalf of the students of our schools, Mr. Chairman, in this area, I'm happy to move this recommendation.
Trustee Hicks, a seconder, you're up.
Thank you. Trustees are elected to make decisions system-wide, and we must look at the decisions we make system-wide. And I've, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, have received many, many emails on both sides of the issue. However, I must say at this time that what Trustee Bishop has stated is the way that I feel about the situation. It is her ward. She knows best as far as the history.
Thank you very much, folks. We do not want to ask people to sit down or leave the room tonight. You're here to listen. Thank you very much.
So it's important for me not only to listen to parents on both sides of the issue, but listen to the person that's been there and knows all the three schools. Probably knows the three schools from the teachers, from the program, from the students better than all of us. So I think that's important for me to say. Secondly, Trustee Bishop has stated that we cannot afford three schools. The reality is the way that the minister and the ministry is funding school boards for capital equipment. They will no longer give us the funds when we have empty spaces. And when I went over the numbers yesterday and this morning, it still comes down to that in 7 years, there'll be 300 empty spaces within those three schools. So this issue is declining enrollment, not just today, but 2 years from now, and 3 years from now, and 5 years from now. So we can go over all the stats, and we can go over the enrollment of the three schools, but the fundamental issue is that declining enrollment will say that those three schools are going to have a lot of empty spaces. Trustee Bishop has also stated that this is the opportunity to use the funds by the end of May for special capital requests. Lastly, for this trustee, and I've closed schools in Ward 8 as well, comes down to what's the best use of the funds to put out the best facilities for our students to learn in. And to me, those two schools need a lot of upgrades so that all the students in that area now will have the best possible facilities in a middle school and a senior school, a junior school and a middle school. So again, I thank the committee, I thank the parents on both sides of the issue for the emails and the calls that I've received, and I thank Trustee Bishop for the work that she's done on behalf of the students in her ward and for those three existing schools.
Thank you, Trustee Hicks. Who's next? Trustee Orban.
Well, one thing is true, that closing schools is like closing communities and making sure that our students, Mr. Chair, receive the best possible education. And you know, it isn't about bricks and mortar, it's about kids and community. And if you look at community, it's more than just the parents of the school, it's the community, the public that pay all of these bills. So I'm looking at it, what we're saying here, we need three schools. You know what I'm looking at, and I've been thinking about this, we have to also be aware, Mr. Chair, the safety of these children. There is that Main Street crossing. So we're looking at three schools. Let's look at what the concept for this Board of Education has always been. A JK to an 8 school, and I think it should be the other side of Main Street. You're saying Dalewood is in a very poor condition, people coming over, as Trustee mentioned, they're going to Harlem and so on. Okay, let's put that aside. You want 3 schools? I say 2 schools, a JK to 8 school on the vicinity to harbor both the Prince Philip and the G.R. Allen School, so that they will be safe there. So what I'm really saying is to maintain the integrity of that community, make it a safe place, and remember, it's not mortars to renovate. Our concept is JK to 8. So why invest all that money there in 3 schools when we could build, if it has to come down to 2 schools or 1 school, make it 1 and make it a JK to 8 and save the community of Prince Philip, G.R. Allen, and the safety of our children. I will not be supporting the motion that Trustee Bishop put forward.
Trustee Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start with, I'm hoping that our guiding principles will be exactly this: the value to the student, the value to the school board, the value to the community, and the value to the local economy. This is on your desk. So these should be our guiding principles for every single arc that we go through. So I also had asked staff to put up one of the heat maps up on the screen, and I was hoping that you would be able to do that. Why isn't that up? It was through, yeah, he knows. So I'm just going to wait for that because the map is very telling.
Maybe you can give us an idea what a heat map is.
Okay, the heat map is what you got in your package, and it shows what the utilization is of all of the schools at the elementary level and at the secondary level in 2006, 2011, 2016, and 2021 for the West Cluster, for the South Cluster, and for the North Cluster. So I'm hoping we can make reference this evening to the West Cluster Elementary. And while we wait for that, I'm going to speak to it, and then we'll look at it on the screen. So I will not be supporting Trustee Bishop's motion. The current walkability in this neighborhood is 83%. And if we close Prince Philip, 73% of those students will qualify for busing. And there are only 3 other schools, urban schools, who qualify under this same busing scenario. That is Ancaster Senior, Veneto, which would have to be explained to me. I have no idea why Veneto would be at 69% of busing, and Winona, which was actually a rural school that has now been moved into the urban boundary. So that one makes sense to me. So what does that leave? It leaves, first of all, you've got 73% of kids in an urban area now being bused to an urban school. That sounds like a rural solution to me. What does that leave? That leaves 27% of them to walk across Main Street West. It is the busiest street in Hamilton, with lanes, including the turning lanes, up to 8 across from Mac, and a minimum of 5 lanes of traffic. And given the Drummond report about obesity rates and potential user fees for transportation, this busing cost of $80,000 to $120,000 a year into perpetuity with the potential to have user fees does not make sense. We're asking elementary students, not secondary students, to cross 5 or 8 lanes of the busiest traffic in Hamilton. Those walkers would be in the same walking area as the Westdale secondary students, the Columbia College students, Mac students, and this scenario of closing Prince Philip leaves 3 schools in the Westdale area, Dalewood, George R. Allen, and Westdale Secondary School, and 0 in the Ainsley Wood department area, So closing Prince Philip, if you look at it differently, it doesn't address any of Dalewood's accommodation and utilization rates. So it has no effect on its excess pupil space. So that means it's really not about excess pupil space, in my opinion. Prince Philip has better utilization and enrollment rates than George R. Allen and Dalewood. If we look at the map from 2006, can you move to 2011? And if you look at, oh, I've got my little pointer.
There it is, yeah. Yay, Karen.
Careful. I'll try not to get the director. So here's Prince Philip, and here's George R. Allen. And you don't see Dalewood because it shares that boundary. So you actually have, in 2011, you've got better utilization of Prince Philip. Can you move it to 2016? So we have better utilization in 2016 in the Prince Philip area than George R. Allen and Dalewood. And if we move to 2021, again, the Prince Philip area has better utilization than the George R. Allen area. So why would we close a school in an area that has better utilization than the other two schools we're saying we're going to keep open? In the capital projects list that we have in our package tonight, there's only $2.2 million left for ARC decisions. And according to the real numbers, it came out, these are real recap numbers. So 1.7 million in items identified as critical for Prince Philip, and George R. Allen with 2.4 million in items identified as critical. They only qualify for health and safety monies. Well, if you add those two together, and we are only going to have $2.2 million left for all of our ARC decisions that we're making this year for 15 secondary schools, King George ARC and the Dalewood ARC. We do have a capital problem. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at what's being proposed, Prince Philip is actually more accessible than Dalewood and George R. Allen. It's not fully accessible, as was explained to us by staff, but it doesn't require an elevator. And we're being asked to provide 2 elevators, one at Dalewood and one at George R. Allen. Well, we know there are other schools that have been waiting for an elevator across our district, and they've been waiting a long time. So do George R. Allen and Dalewood get their elevator before Bonetto, who's been waiting probably longer? I don't know. Asking for 2 elevators at 2 schools is quite a tall order. And then I'm going to talk about the learning. So if we look at the learning environments, we've been given data about the benefits of a JK to 8 school. I'm going to give you my own scenario because both of our daughters went to a middle school, and it was an excellent school. But they lost out on the opportunity to role model and mentor much younger students. No helping out in the JK pen, no helping the JK SK kids with their mittens and boots and jackets, no lunchtime help in the kindergarten rooms with their sandwich lids, their milk cartons, and their juice boxes. No more reading buddies. It's lost opportunities to be young, and it's lost opportunities to role model. We got some data from staff, and I'll read just a couple of excerpts about it. It says here, for students 11 to 13 years old, given this sensitive development period, interventions that alter the 5th and 6th graders' school configuration have the potential of lasting influence. As a result, decisions regarding grade configurations warrant ample consideration. Student achievement for grades 6, 7, and 8 is higher for students in schools with an elementary configuration of K to 8, K to 12, versus a middle school of 6 to 8 or 7 to 9, or secondary configurations of 7 to 12. Research findings indicate that attending a school with an elementary configuration is beneficial for middle grade students age 11 to 13 for their attendance, their motivation, and behavior. There was a study that found that grade 6 and 7 students in schools with elementary configurations of K to 6, K to 7, and K to 12 had higher attendance, fewer suspensions, and fewer behavioral problems relative to the students in a middle school environment. K to 8 students showed higher self-esteem than their peers in a 6 to 8 school configuration. That talks about school transitioning. School transitions may be particularly intense for students who at the same time are negotiating the physiological and emotional changes brought on by puberty. Furthermore, elementary schools are generally thought of as more emotionally supportive than secondary schools, given that students in elementary classrooms are able to bond with primarily one teacher and share most of their time with one set of peers. Lots of data to support a K to 8 model. And we have an opportunity to do it, and we didn't do it. So I'm wondering about that. So given that Dalewood has a weak utilization rate and a high facility index, high cost to heat and maintain the pool, etc., I would actually consider closing Dalewood and keeping George R. Allen open because it did receive some good places to learn funding, which actually reduced its FCI index. But that was a decision that the board and the staff had made. Or, and this is where I really hope I have your attention, that maybe we could table it and we could decide after we look at a French immersion strategy, because the French immersion strategy right now is under consultation. It's coming in the fall, I believe, through the director. Because what does the staff recommendation look like? Well, I actually applaud them that it does achieve program balance between French immersion and English. But how does it do this? It imports English students from another community, so they lose their school, and the Hamilton Wentworth District School Board increases its busing costs into perpetuity by $80,000 to $100,000 a year. This does not sit well with me as an FI accommodation strategy to leave another community empty. We need to rethink single and dual track FI schools, and Prince Philip should not set the precedent for this experiment. English students should not be shipped around to balance the FI program demand, which I support French immersion, but we're filling holes. Community schools should not be closed to balance the FI holes around our system. I am sure that better solutions can be found through the impending FI strategy currently underway. Overall, I support a JK to 8 model. I would table or defer this ARC decision to when an FI accommodation strategy and consultation is concluded. We have a single track FI school on the mountain. We have the new Belmore School in the east, but we have no single FI track school in the west yet. I do not support 3 schools in Westdale, 2 elementary, 1 high school, and 0 in the Ainsley Woods community, which substantially increase costs for the board for busing, just to achieve a program balance at an FI school without addressing the excess pupil places at Dalewood. I won't be supporting the motion.
Thank you. And who's next? Trustee White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've looked forward to speaking for a while. These are long processes, and I guess this is our second ARC that we've done. So it's interesting going through these for a year, listening to all the information, and then having a couple minutes to finally say what's on our minds. But I just want to say, first of all, thanks certainly to all the folks that put together this ARC. And it's really a combination of staff, it's a combination of our community, it's a combination of a lot of people that really deserve a round of applause. Also around this table, I think we need to certainly recognize, there's differing beliefs among trustees, but I think we also do have the same idea in mind and the same priority, which is students. We just sometimes approach them in different ways, but I think everyone does have the same priority at heart. So what I basically, throughout the entire process, I've come to a number of conclusions on this ARC, and this really has driven my decision. Number one, we've learned throughout the process that the building itself is in better shape than we originally thought. So originally, we thought the building was in quite poor shape. And then as the process went on, we started to learn that actually the building is in better shape. And near the end, I think there's a question from Trustee Piddle asked, what was the reason for prioritizing this ARC? And the answer was that of the prohibitive to repair designation. And then we learned that about a month into the process that wasn't the case. Personally, I think at that point, the decision should have come back to trustees, and we could have decided if we still wanted to continue with the ARC. But but that wasn't the case. So we continued with the ARC, and certainly not being a member of the ARC, most of this information I didn't hear about until a number of months afterwards, probably into the fall or the winter, when we started to get into the loop on what was happening with the ARC. But personally, given that different information, I think it wouldn't have been prioritized at the front of the pack. Also, as we learned going through the process, is that student enrollment is actually better than expected at Prince Philip and a number of other schools in the area. So that was another consideration I made. For me, as I make ARC decisions, I think building condition is certainly an important factor, but I think student enrollment is also, or if not a more important factor, because we want to make sure our schools are in areas where our students are. And in this case, the enrollment numbers do not look too bad in the area. And we spent the past couple of weeks looking at a number of charts, and one that, for instance, Trustee Turkster has put up on the screen. And what I think it shows is that there are students still in these areas. And when we look at some of the other areas within our board, there are schools that we would close long before we would close Prince Philip or anything in this ARC. There's a number of schools that I think would be much easier decisions. Not to say that in a number of years we may not revisit a decision like this, but I don't think this is a priority. So that's something that makes me question this ARC. I know as well, having lived in the Ainsley Wood area, what the community is like. Unfortunately, at the time, I was a university student, and one that received, or as we hear in the process, and they receive a bit of a bad rap. I was always an advocate on building community with the university students. However, I did witness firsthand, not that I was involved or admit that I was involved in any destruction to anyone's property or anything along those lines. So, my apologies. So, but no, I am familiar with the community itself, and I appreciated living in the community. But the school really is a hub, and when you get rid of Prince Philip, and I strongly believe you do gut the community. And that's not something that I'm prepared to do. Also, it's mentioned that trustees have tough decisions, and in certain circumstances, trustees have to make unpopular decisions, and we have to think system-wide. But thinking system-wide, in this scenario, I would not approve this in any cluster or any community within the city of Hamilton. So that's my approach of thinking system-wide. There are a number of other ARCs that I look forward to doing. In fact, ARCs can be good things in many communities. In many of my communities, we could welcome ARCs because we could improve a number of our schools. There still is walkability. We do need improvements in our schools, but in this ARC, I don't think it's necessary. So I hate to say it, a lot of hard work was put into this ARC. I don't think it was a priority. I don't think we should have ever completed this ARC. I hoped we would have revisited this earlier, but I am strongly supportive of maintaining all three schools as the ARC has recommended.
Any further speakers at this time? Trustee Simmons?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's interesting hearing all the different opinions around the table. And it's interesting how we all look at the information and we can read it in different ways. But one thing is for certain, that every one of us is looking at students. And it's good to hear that everybody has students on their mind. And of course, myself, I think Trustee Bishop did mention it. And there's a lot of mythologies out there on why there is an ARC done. And a lot of it was Trustee Bishop mentioned that she heard from her George R. Allen community about renewal. And in an age where we don't get a lot of capital dollars for renewal, this is one way of going about it. I know the school, Prince Philip, out of all the other things it has with utilization and that, it's because it's a smaller school. It's a small school. And that's problematic with their present funding formula for boards to maintain. And it's why it's in the place that it's in. Whether we close it now or whether a future board closes it, I think is part of the question, because I think because of its size, the writing is on the wall. That's my opinion. So why are we going through this ARC process? Well, because we want to make sure that our students are going to get the best education possible. Right now, education is going through fundamental changes with programming, as you've all heard, 21st century programming and and the facilities that go with that. You know, being the Ward 3 trustee, I'm fortunate we were able to close old schools and build new schools, and we have now state-of-the-art elementary schools in Ward 3 that can rival any elementary school in this province for programming and facilities. And it's great to see. And I would want the same for all students. Bricks and mortar are one thing, but it's the infrastructure within that school that's the important thing, as well as obviously the teachers that we put in there. And I worry that if we keep status quo, that these three schools are going to continue to suffer, because what you're going to see over the next number of years is just money put in for health and safety and for urgent capital needs. The other thing that we risk, and we've heard from the Drummond report, we've heard from the provincial budget, you know, that we need to consolidate. By 2020, we're going to have almost 4,000 excess elementary spaces within our board. I know that's right across the board. I heard earlier French immersion strategy was mentioned. Well, part of the problem and the turmoil we're going through right now with French immersion is because we have a lot of small schools. And we recently, you know, and I know the board didn't want to do this, we recently, because of all-day kindergarten funding strategies, we had to remove SKFI from our board programming, and that's coming over the next couple of years or so. But we probably wouldn't have had to do that if we had if we had fewer elementary schools and smaller schools. We would have kept it. And as a FI parent, I know, I've heard it, and I don't have an FI school in my ward. We have to, our kids get bused or take the bus, so I understand that that's how it is. And my kids aren't worse the wear for it. Actually, it builds in it makes them grow up a little quicker in, by giving them extra responsibilities. But that said, I think we have to think about the risk of losing our if we don't consolidate, we're going to risk losing some of our top-up funding that we get. We get top-up funding from the province every year for our schools that aren't fully utilized. And we know from what's coming down from the province that a lot of that money could very well go away to boards that haven't taken care of their excess capacity. And that's going to hurt students if we have excess capacity and we don't get the top-up funding anymore. And if we lose the capital, grants for student needs because we haven't consolidated our board enough. Those kinds of things worry me because I know a school is important for a community. Of course it is, and all of us see that, and that's why these decisions are hard, and that's why we wake up at 3 a.m. Thinking about it. But I know communities are stronger than just the school. There are other things that make a community strong as well, and we have to worry about the kind of education our kids are going to get, because they're going to be in we're talking about the economy and the future. They're going to be in a very competitive world. And a school board is going to need to be able to be flexible, to move its programming, to change its programming as the world changes. And so therefore, we're going to have very efficiently run school boards so that we can provide that funding and those facilities that will provide that. So the students I'm looking at most importantly, not so much the students that have already gone, the students that are there definitely, but also the future students, the ones that are sleeping in the maternity wards tonight. Because in a few years they're going to be coming into our school system and they're going to need the best possible programming and facilities to go to. And, you know, as much as it would break my heart to close this school, I still think overall it's for the better for this school board survival as one of the best school boards in the province, and for our long-term concerns for 21st century programming and the facilities that we have to provide our students for that. So I will be supporting the motion.
Okay, anybody else to speak? Student Trustee Shen.
Through the chair. Okay, so with regards to the Dalewood arc, as a student, I've been through the system and I know how what the experience is in elementary school. And elementary school is really a time for you to get to know yourself and feel comfortable about yourself as well. So looking at the Prince Philip numbers, it's very scary to see students who are going to go from, this is in the staff recommendation, to go from 150 student community all the way to a 600 student community. That is four times the size. So we're talking about lack of opportunities. We're talking about students who are still young, but they start to feel lost in our schools. And I think at 600, we're getting close to some of our high school enrollments. And if we do want to foster an environment where students can grow to the best of their potential, then this small school is an option to consider. Also, my second point is when we're talking about Prince Philip, we need to consider the how it has the Mandarin program. Now, this is an innovative program that we need to keep, that offers something only our board, only this school offers in the province. And if we're thinking about moving this to GR Allen, then we have to think about how this is a transitioning program for our students. So all of a sudden, our students who are trying to transition into English, they get lost in an environment that also has French students, because we see this 3-language environment. And as we saw that there's no research on schools with 3-track schools and how they work. This is very doubtable as to if it will sustain or not, because it is a fantastic, innovative program, and we're putting it at risk if we move it to GR Allen. And my third point is, the future is really uncertain in the area in terms of the growth of McMaster and, let's say, grad students, grad programs, and more young families moving in, and how our programs develop in the area. So whether it's French immersion in George R. Allen, or whether it's Mandarin in Prince Philip. So the future is uncertain. So we see our data, and we need to, it's the best projections we have, so it's something that we consider, but it's not something that we need to live by as solid fact. And so to conclude, updates are definitely important, but as long as our schools are safe places for our students, the option of a small school that is walkable is a great option. Personally, I met my 2 best friends that I grew up with in elementary school because we lived on the same street. We walked to school together, and that built such a great friendship. And so, as we heard from the Prince Philip community themselves, the school is in a good condition, and its projected enrollment would be 89% in the near future. So we have to consider that portables are required at anything above 90%. So really, to conclude, from my point of view as a student, keeping 3 schools open for now while we are uncertain about the future is a great option to consider.
Okay, I have no more speakers at this time. Trustee Brennan.
Yes, thank you very much. The eloquence of my fellow trustees is extremely high standard. Thank you to Trustee Shen, particularly for expressing a lived experience and how much closer to the experience she is than I have been for some time. However, I am going to support this motion, and I've backed in to that decision. I was very inspired, I think is the right word, by the various community presentations a few weeks ago. I'm not quite sure where my thinking was at the time, Mr. Chair, but I stepped back, did some thinking, some conversation, some reading, looking a little closer at things, and still was, it was the community presentations that compelled me to rethink of this. Triple think it, make sure I know why I would be doing a motion one way or the other. I certainly was very interested in another option, which would be the JK to 8, 2 schools, JK to 8, as Trustee Terkstra has mentioned. I certainly was interested in the possibility that those 2 schools would be G.R. Allen and Prince Philip. But as I looked at the numbers in the middle term, over the next 4 or 5 years, it did not seem sustainable to have a split middle school program into 2 different schools. I know there's various pieces of literature for the middle school, not for the middle school, but this board has taken the position of JK to 8 being the school organization that we want to promote. So anything that's going to look different than that, I would certainly want to take a real strong look at. So initially, this JK to 8 looked, at 2 schools, looked very interesting to me. I also was, and some people will know this very well, because I had quite a number of people talking to me over the weekend, which was very friendly and very nice. But the idea that somehow these 3 schools went down a rabbit hole that they shouldn't have gone down, that there was some information that was misleading, that in fact we should just rewind the whole process because some false, flawed information started the process in the first place. I was compelled by that and very sympathetic about that. Some of you may know that 10 years ago there was an opportunity to consider closing one of the schools in my ward, which is Dundas, and it was the only ARC that had any secondary school considerations versus the other ARCs at the time. So this board and various other political issues occurred that stopped the closure of either one of those 2 schools, and they are now 10 years later. We're back at the same conversation. But I could not be compelled finally to ignore the work of the staff, the ARC committee itself, the various trustees, the community, the counselors. I could not ignore that and say, let's just stay status quo. Because fundamentally, we have declining enrollment. Across our entire district, we are going to have to close schools. And I believe that this is the right opportunity, the right time to do this, that we close Prince Philip and redistribute the operational funds and the various renovation funds and funding opportunities that we will have to create absolutely phenomenal learning opportunities and experiences in our remaining 2 schools in the neighborhood. I will be supporting this motion.
Okay, any other speakers? Trustee Johnstone.
Thank you. I, like Jessica Brennan, also struggled with this ARC. There seemed to be so many, I guess, questions and mistakes along the way. And while I agree that this ARC certainly would not have been first on our list, we are where we are, and we have completed the ARC. And while it bothers me strongly that we would be closing down a school that has realized, I guess, across across the system we have 91% utilization rate, it still does not address the fact that we will have 300 empty seats in the next 7 years. And while I am not convinced of the level of costs predicted by recap, there are still many big ticket items and renovations that we need to conduct that I'm concerned that we would otherwise not obtain the money to build, to construct our schools so that we are offering the best learning environment. And not just locally, but as Trustee Simmons mentioned, we also we pose risks for the rest of the board when we do not meet the mandate by the industry to realize 100% utilization rate, where we risk losing other grants. So it is with that I sadly will be supporting this motion.
Trustee Petal?
I move to table this motion.
Okay, I need somebody to second. Trustee White seconds. There can be no debate on a tabling motion. All in favor of tabling? Trustee Johnstone, Trustee White, Trustee Orban, Student Trustee Janis, Student Trustee Shen, Trustee Terkstra, Trustee Petal, all opposed to tabling. Trustee Brennan, Trustee Hicks, Trustee Mulholland, Trustee Simmons, Trustee Barlow, Trustee Bishop. Tabling motion fails 6-5, or 5-6, I guess I should say. So the original motion is back on the table. Any other speakers? Trustee Terkstra.
So I just wanted to, I guess just speak again one more time about abandoning a neighborhood, because what's left in that neighborhood in Ainsley Wood is market share for our coterminous board. What's left is Canadian Martyrs and St. Mary's Secondary School. And right across the street from St. Mary's Secondary School is Prince Philip. So Prince Philip, if it were to close, leaves a big, beautiful field for St. Mary's to purchase and expand their sports program. And Canadian Martyrs is within walking distance of the Ainsley Wood community. So, just to reiterate, we are making a decision tonight about abandoning community schools in favor of filling our French immersion imbalances across the board.
Trustee Mulholland. Question's been called. All in favor of calling the question? Trustee Brennan, Trustee Hicks, Trustee Mulholland, Trustee Barlow. All opposed to calling the question. Trustee Johnstone, Trustee White, Trustee Orban, Trustee Simmons, Trustee Bishop, Trustee Petal. Fails 4-7. Next speaker, Trustee Orban.
We as trustees are making the decision for the future learning of our students. I remember a realtor saying to me once, Lillian, it's location, location, location. And the location is in the West End, in the Prince Philip, Juilliard, Ellen area. With all the dollars that we will have to put into renovations, would we not look at holding back our decision in this particular arc, just to be safe, just to give some realization what could happen over the next 2 or 3 years? For me, I've always maintained small family schools when I used to work in the system, but also there is a board concept for a JK to 8 school. There's the safety of our children. There are mistakes that have been made in the facilities during the internment of looking at what we really want to do for our students. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going through the secondary school arc and we're mixing elementary in here right now. That's not the way to go about it. I believe that we should look at our decision-making process in terms of delaying this process a couple of years so that we build in the future. We're not going to have the money to build all over the place. So let's make a decision that will impact on the learning of our students in their own community, in the community that has a stake in our little kids, our children. We are going to be spending an awful lot of money to renovate George R. Allen School and Dalewood. Look at what we're doing. We're not really considering the impact on our kids in our community. I always thought that community has the power and the right. I sincerely say to you right now, if we had a survey done for the Dalewood Arc, we would get the results to really press upon us as trustees to do the right thing in terms of our communities. The community has spoken. Children have spoken. Our student trustees have spoken. And we have a construction person through Karen Turkstra, our trustee, who has spoken. The realtors have spoken. And we have people who in the greater community involved in not only middle school but universities, we have spoken. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues, let's think about it. What's wrong with delaying the process for another 2 or 3 years when we are going to be looking at the
Trustee Connor?
So I had a few comments then at this point of the evening. I noticed around the room, so I have a couple of things to say. I noticed around the room that there seemed to be some people not familiar with these maps that went up. And that worried me because I've been away and they were in my locker waiting for me when I drove down here on Saturday morning. It was the first thing I wanted to look at. In fact, that's why I wasn't up to speed on some of the other things tonight, because I wanted to concentrate on this item for tonight. So I want to just, if staff could clarify, where did these, I have more to say, but if staff could please clarify for the trustees where this information came from, when they got it, what it means. Could you please do that? Because there seems to be some confusion about a very compelling visual of the state of the HWDSB.
Ellen?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the maps that are put together here are based on the enrollment projections that were done. When you do enrollment projections, they're done at the granular level based on your elementary and then your secondary. These are the enrollment projections that were done at the start of the secondary school arcs. These were updated in or completed in January of 2011. So these are the enrollment projections that were done last January, and they were produced by, for us by Watson and Associates. We've had these numbers since last January, and all of the data that you've seen in your ARCs, all of the enrollment projections that you've seen at the secondary level and the elementary level is the data that was used to create those maps.
Okay, so I think I need to be clearer. I know the data because I've done my own with it, but these maps, when did they come into the hands of the trustees? I already said I got them on Saturday. So the trustees who have to make the decisions received this. So staff, now we know staff have had it since January. When did the trustees get it?
Dr. Malloy?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the actual maps were just created 2 weeks ago and were given to the trustees early last week. But the data that went into creating those has been around, as we've stated. So in terms of different learning styles, which might wish for a graphic visualization, we hadn't received word that people wanted it done in this format. But what the manager has tried to say is that this information was just in graph form for the last year and a bit. And so it's just now been put into a different format.
Okay, so now that we're clear that this is brand new to us as trustees, and, you know, about 80% of people, if not higher, are visual thinkers, we've got a whole system to look at from a secondary level, and right now tonight, you know, we're getting a practice round on saying, does this tell us a story? Because it's really hard to compute the numbers in your head unless somebody puts it into a graph or somebody puts it into a picture. And that's what this has done. And earlier, Trustee Terkstra tried to walk you through the years and what this says. So now we've only got 2021 up there, but I want to take you back to 2011, which says Prince Philip right now in 2011 was flagged orange. So you got a 4-color code here. You got green is good, yellow is a warning, orange is caution, and red is, you know, warning, warning, Will Robinson. For those who remember Lost in Space, which I do. So, you know, we're going from orange, Prince Philip, green, George R. Allen, which would make you think, gee, the recommendation on the table must be sound. Except when you go forward on our own staff's projections, you go to 2016 and Prince Philip changes back to yellow. Caution, not, or just an early warning system. And George R. Allen has now gone red. And you go forward another 5 years to 2021, which is the scope of our decisions. We're in a 10-year scope of decisions, and Prince Philip is getting a little hot again. It's gone orange, but look at George R. Allen. It's still dark orange. So which neighborhood's really at risk here? So why are we transporting kids from the one neighborhood to the other? Is it because of the small school? Well, you could maybe use your money to build a little extra addition on it and get the kids out of the basement of George R. Allen and not have to put in an elevator into the schools. You know, we've got a pocket full of money, and that's all we've got, and nobody needs to reaffirm that anymore. Everybody gets it. Every single person in this room gets it. But we get the choice, with the help of the public, how to use that bucket full of money or handful of money. And there are multiple options in this scenario. You know, it really concerns me. And, you know, I didn't speak earlier because I really kind of thought, I had a sense we were all over the map on this one. And I was trying to buy us some time. And when I sensed that people didn't understand this, I really thought we needed to have some time to internalize this, especially, no disrespect to this particular arc. We got bigger ones coming real fast. And if we don't understand what these mean, when we're the ones doing the projections and we're the ones deciding how to spend the bucket full of money, you know, we got a problem around our own table. I kind of think we need our own conversation one day, just us, to talk about what does this stuff really mean before we make these hard decisions. So I go back to this particular arc, you know, and I don't have anything prepared here tonight. I don't have a word in front of me. I'm winging all of this. But I look at the numbers and I look at the scenario that, again, I just picked up and tried to understand the option. Why wasn't there a grade K-8 model? We did this a decade ago. We did it all over the system. And you know what? It's been a success. We moved little schools together. We figured out how to add a porta-pack if it was just a tad too small. We figured out how to utilize the gym space. We figured out how to keep them as local as possible, and it worked. You know, it worked. It was a success. So why 10 years later we would move away from it when the staff's data, when asked the question, because it wasn't done, they apparently moved away from it in the committee. You know, we're looking at Prince Philip being utilized at 118%. And going out to year 2021, the one that matches the map, they're still at 107 if you went to a JK-8 model. And you look at George R. Allen, and you end up with utilization of 139% going to 114. I agree completely. We have to make a hard decision on one school has to close. You know, so I can't support the community's theme of 3 stay. But I think we got the wrong one for closure. We've got the wrong one for closure. There's a better solution. It's in the staff zone numbers. It's in the staff zone maps. And it's in the staff zone experience and many of the trustees around this table's experience that the K-8 model works. And we've done it. So, you know, I can't support this motion, and I appreciate that the local trustee generally knows best. But I don't think so this time. I think something got lost. Something got lost. And I'm only saying that because it was brought up. I wouldn't have countered that, but it was brought up at this table. And you know what? We're inconsistent on that regard, and that's another thing I want to put out there tonight. I'll take a risk on that. We're inconsistent when trustees around this table want to make a statement like that, because it's not always honored. And so I'm not doing that to be disrespectful. I want to make that very clear right now. But we're not consistent. You know, you look back on your own records and you'll find we're not. We don't always agree with what the local trustee thinks. So, you know, let's put that one aside for now. I just want to level it out there because we got more coming. But the facts themselves are compelling that we should be supporting our own model. We should not be putting these kids at risk. They should not be walking across lanes of traffic. We should not be, you know, inviting the minister to almost come down to us and apply a user fee on transportation, because quite frankly, that's the neighborhood that can't afford it. So we've, you know, like somehow we've got this reversed. So if we can't agree to table it to buy some time, and that didn't go over, then, you know, we're down to making a decision tonight, and then our rules will kick in. We'll have, you know, opportunity for the next 2 weeks to hear from the public even louder if it doesn't kind of find another, a solution that everyone can at least get behind, because everybody knows we have a problem. It's how we solve it. So I'll stop it at that. I won't support the motion.
Any other speakers? Any other speakers? Trustee White?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to add one thing really briefly, and like I said, I do appreciate all the arguments this evening. One of the pieces of information, I did forget this from my speech, so I apologize for having to speak again. The one other piece that was a major factor in this, and it seems to be a consensus around the table, the situation right now looks mediocre, but unfortunately in the future it's going to look worse. My biggest fear in all of this is some of the projections that we've received. I know in the past, you know, we try to make the best projections we can. We never know exactly what's going to happen in the future, but we hope the projections are going to be accurate to the picture and the future picture. Looking back, we can probably take projections from 10 years ago and hope that they're correct, but if we took them, they're not going to be correct. So what makes me most uncomfortable about this decision is that we're trying to use data in the future or projecting in the future and hoping that information is going to be correct. I'd rather see a picture today that is unfavorable, knowing that the decision in the future will not be favorable as well. But in this case, I just can't be confident with the numbers in the future because they can go up and down, and they're general trends in the future on what could happen. But I would like to see more evidence of those trends today. So some of the information does make me feel uncomfortable. So that's one thing that does caution me in this decision. Thank you.
Trustee Bishop?
Well, just, I have a few things to say. First of all, I'd like to counter about the transportation with Dalewood has always been, students have always been crossing Main Street to go to Dalewood, and Dalewood has been part of that. So, and the other thing that I'd like to just draw to people's attention is that there are currently 66 students who are taking transportation, some of it is courtesy transportation, to Prince Philip, and that there are also 33 other students whose parents are driving them to the school. So out of approximately 200 students, 100 students are being transported either by the board or by their parents because they're coming from to the Mandarin program. So this is not. That's just one fact I'd like to put on. The K-8 scenario, I must say that the committee worked very hard on trying to find a way to see if there was a possibility to do 2 K-8 schools. And Mr. Chairman, the problem is that there really aren't enough students in the Prince Philip area to create a viable program. If people have looked at their charts, they will see that even if you add French immersion in, to try and bolster the numbers, French immersion would be so small that you would have triple grades probably. And I'm talking about 5, 6, 7, and 8. And with the English program, there are, in 2020, the projections are for 10 students in grade 6, 9 students in grade 7, 10 students in grade 8. These would be split grades, Mr. Chairman. This would not, and there would not be the opportunities for the kind of program, and really that's what we're all about, the kind of program we'd want to see these kids who have already been experiencing this at Dalewood in terms of specialist teachers, in terms of having a music program, in terms of being able to have a phys ed teacher. So the K-8, although the community looked at a variety of ways in which there could be a K-8 in 2 schools, they looked at Dalewood and Prince Philip, they looked at Georgia Allen and Prince Philip, they looked at adding French immersion to Prince Philip, taking into account the 33 children who currently go from the Prince Philip area into the Georgia Allen area. And they could not make a program that would be of an equal size or an equal opportunities at Prince Philip than for the other children. So, Mr. Chairman, here we are. None of us like this process. Closure of a community school. We've been closing community schools. We're going to have to go on closing community schools. We closed Sheffield. I know they're still mourning about it. We closed Linden. We closed Parkwood, small community schools that were in the rural areas. We closed Lloyd George, which is the only bright spot in that little area surrounded by industry. We closed Robert Land. Luckily, that has been taken up by the Eva Rothwell Centre. And small schools, Mr. Chairman, will continue to be at great risk. In fact, I recognise that Prince Philip was in danger of closure way back in 2003, 2004, which is why I was so supportive, Mr. Chairman, of the Mandarin programme, because I saw that otherwise the writing was on the wall. We have a problem with our funding. We have insufficient funding, and what I fear for this community is death by neglect, Mr. Chairman. We've had for the last 10 years, we've had schools in limbo because they have had the PTR standing over them. So we've had 2 schools that we haven't really done very much to. If we don't make a resolution tonight, they will continue to be in limbo, Mr. Chairman, because where we have not resolved school closure issues, we don't usually go about. We don't usually put our very, very scarce dollars into those schools. The ministry asks us to think of schools that are going to be open for at least 10 years. So in terms of the needs of this community, I would say we need some updates in these schools. One of the ways to do this is to close one of the schools. It's been very hard to find a solution. There's never complete win situation in anything like these occasions. But in terms of when I think about the schools in Ward 2 and the other parts of Ward 1, they're in a far better state than the schools on this side of the 403. I'm hopeful that we will make some sort of decision tonight, Mr. Chairman.
Having no further speakers, we'll move to the question. Trustee Petal.
We have something called wrap-up in our rules?
Trustee Petal, I acknowledge you. You don't need to. Carry on.
Oh, thank you. Okay, good. Thank you very much. We're all of us. I can feel it. We all are a bit conflicted about what to do with this one. I think we're all in agreement that we have to close one, but I still sense complete non-unanimity across this board for have we got the right solution. And that's what really bothers me. There's a couple of different ideas that are floating up there, and the loss completely to one neighborhood having all 3 levels of schools to another neighborhood having nothing is troubling at best. So I'm going to try another type of emotion. I think there's some work that could still be done on option 13 that came forward by staff. And I'm going to
I'm
try a
sorry to
referral
inter-
motion back to staff, that this ARC be referred back to staff to take a deeper look and, you know, maybe put the ARC people back to work on scenario 13, JK to 8. Referral motion back to staff. Look at all three schools, not one, not two, look at all three of them and say, how do you make the preferred model work that this board supports? Referral motion.
Okay, we need a seconder for the referral motion. Thank you, Trustee Orban. Referral motions can be debated. Questions, comments about the referral motion? You've heard the rationale why, I believe. Lillian, Trustee Orban?
First of all, why do we want it? Obviously, a 6-5 vote is not unanimous. And when that happens, you feel the discomfort, you feel the electricity in the room. I do, because I certainly feel it. Then I think to myself, through the chair, that what's wrong with taking some time to go back to staff, because there have been some discrepancies with regard to accurate data, be it enrollment, be it projection, be it support. Mr. Chair, all that it will do is give some of us the opportunity to hear back of what that error or non-error or what that data really means. You know why that's important? Because a 6-5 is unreal. And we all had good reasons for why and why. But even in the people that voted the other way, there were questions. Oh yeah, we heard there were some problems with the facility. We were not sure about the accuracy of projected enrollment down the road. So all we're saying, let's get clarity so that when we do make the right decision, it'll be closer to being unanimous. And that's not a bad idea.
I support the referral motion because it gives us a chance to look at some updated numbers with the Mandarin program going to grade 4. You know, you change some parameters around the out-of-catchment. You know, you can allow out-of-catchment English students in, and you can, and then cap the French immersion. It's just that as trustees, we weren't given, I wasn't at the ARC, so I'm just looking at the data, and I would just like it represented as why staff didn't consider a JK to 8 model with one JK to 8 on one side of Main Street and one JK to 8 on the other side. Because you can build purpose-built middle school classrooms elsewhere. And Dalewood has a little auditorium, but it's right beside the high school, which has a bigger, beautiful auditorium. So why does it need to have 2 auditoriums there? I mean, they can have a shared use. And, you know, Dalewood is an expensive school for us. I forget what Trustee Bishop had said about the cost of the heating of the pool. $90,000 a year or something, or, you know, so it's expensive. We could be spending that money elsewhere. So I'm going to support the referral because I would like to get some more information back on it. And again, you know, there's compelling evidence given to us by staff about the JK to 8 learning model.
Speaking against the referral, we have spent hours on this. In fact, we had a night to get all the questions. In fact, Trustee Turkster asked that question in the package, have the officials looked at a JK to 8, and I think they answered that question in the package that she got. There's a lot of major critical decisions that are made around this board at a 6-5 vote and a 7-4 vote. That's what happened when we amalgamated. We told the ministry, when you cut down the trustees to 11, those types of votes are going to happen. It's time to make the decision. We've got all the information. They worked over a year, the ARC. The ARC, as Trustee Bishop stated, they wrestled with the JK-8, and they didn't come up with a recommendation on that. So I'm speaking against the referral.
Any other speakers on the referral motion? Seeing none, all in favor of referral? Trustee White, Trustee Orban, Trustee Turkstra, Trustee Peddle. All against referral? Trustee Brennan, Trustee Johnstone, Trustee Hicks, Trustee Mulholland, Trustee Simmons, Trustee Barlow, Trustee Bishop, Student Trustee Janis, Student Trustee Shen. Fails 4-7. Regular motion back on the floor. Seeing no other speakers on the regular motion, so the motion as moved by Trustee Bishop, seconded by Trustee Hicks, is action item B on your recommended action. All in favor of the recommendation? Trustee Brennan, Trustee Johnstone, Trustee Hicks, Trustee Simmons, Trustee Barlow, Trustee Bishop. All opposed to the recommendation? Trustee White, Trustee Orban, Trustee Mulholland, Student Trustee Janis, Student Trustee Shen, Trustee Turkstra, Trustee Peddle. Recommendation passes 6-5. Thank you.